At WFM Labs, our organization recognizes the importance of gaining market insights to compete effectively and provide better goods and services to our customers. However, exchanging price or commercially sensitive information with competitors can violate antitrust laws and harm competition. To avoid antitrust risk, it is essential to ensure that information exchanges in the WFM Labs community are reasonable and promote competition. This includes avoiding discussions or coordination of sensitive topics such as customer prices, pricing paid to vendors, compensation paid to employees, or proprietary information. If you would like more information, please refer to the guidelines outlined by the FTC and DOJ, Antitrust Guidelines for Collaborations Among Competitors. In addition, WFM Labs meetings are being recorded. By continuing to be in the meeting, you are consenting to be recorded. And finally, we ask that all participants review and comply with our code of conduct. Thank you.
Hello, it's Ted Lango with WFM Labs, and I'm joined today by Nate Brown, a co-founder of WFM Labs, and we're going to have a quick conversation on the cost of attrition. We'll take a moment to cover what I call the perceived cost of attrition, and then want to expose some of the true costs behind attrition. Most important, we've created a dynamic attrition calculator that we want to share with everybody at WFM Labs and give you a small demo of it today. Thanks for joining me, Nate.
Yeah, sure, Ted.
Just a quick reminder, WFM Labs, we're an organization of workforce management professionals who are really seeking to invent the next generation of workforce management practices. First and foremost, we believe that we need to prioritize employees first and leverage new processes, new technology, to really rethink the WFM playbook. On March 9th, we held a session on the new workforce maturity model. It was an interactive workshop. We exposed what we believe the steps are to transition out of traditional workforce management into next generation workforce management. At the top of the scale, we're really targeting to be an employee-first organization. And in order to do so, we have to solve the legacy problem of high attrition. That's why today we want to talk about the high costs of attrition, start to introduce this dynamic calculator and the concepts. We'll be working toward another interactive session on Thursday, April 13th at 7 p.m. We'll go over a little bit of this material again, give people a chance to give their input. Maybe we're missing something in the calculations of attrition, and then we'll spend some time also dynamically displaying this attrition calculator and taking questions on that as well. I encourage people to join us. Mark it down on your calendar, Thursday, April 13th, and we'll have an interactive session based on today's content. So let's first talk about what I would consider to be kind of the legacy way of thinking about attrition, or maybe the way that a lot of executives think about attrition in a fairly simple framework. We all know that when someone leaves, we have to hire a replacement employee and we have to train them. And in contact centers, that training quite often is thought about as the time that's lost or the cost of attrition. In a math example here, we may say a 4-week training or a 1-month salary. If our agents have a $48,000 salary, 1 month is $4,000. If our annual attrition rate is 40%, and let's just take, for example, we had a staff group of 500 employees, that would mean that we'd need to train up 200 new hires if we had a 40% turnover rate. So a quick, simple back of the napkin math of the cost of attrition that one might have in their minds is, well, at 200 hires, I lost a month in training, that's $4,000. My cost of attrition is $800,000.
And I would just say, Ted, I would even say that 4-week training time period is probably a little light. in my past lives, I've seen 12 to 16 weeks training timeline. So it's probably even greater than that.
Yeah, and that's exactly right. The training 4 weeks is probably the most aggressive type of training program out there. There may be a few organizations that only train for a few weeks, but since technology has taken a lot of the easy calls out, today we find ourselves having to train people for much more complex calls.
Yeah.
This is kind of a very simple dimension way to look at the cost of attrition, but it really can ultimately understate the true costs of attrition. And when we say true costs of attrition, there's a lot of things that go into replacing an employee. We have to think about going out to the market and recruiting those people. And usually there's a cost per candidate that's involved in going and recruiting our replacements. There's onboarding of those replacement agents. And often these may be soft dollars in-house, but there's costs that are incurred by IT, by HR, by other organizations that help support onboarding those new hires. In addition, when we hire to replace people, if we have to hire 200, more than likely we're hiring more than 200 because we have training attrition. If we hire a class of 20, we may find that 5 people drop out. So that cost for those additional hires that drop out need to be factored in as well. And perhaps the most significant area that's often misunderstood or overlooked is really the speed to proficiency. When we hire a replacement, they're not nearly as efficient as a tenured agent. And there's true costs that really come into play when we have to replace someone. We're not replacing someone one-to-one. When we have 20 people that leave based on this speed to proficiency, we need to hire significantly more than 20 people to account for what we'll call their inefficiencies. Nate, anything you've seen on speed to proficiency? I know I've seen 1.5 times to 2 times longer on calls.
Yep. And usually it's in my past few companies that I've been a part of, it's been a 6-month, a 6-month ramp to proficiency. So it's quite costly, as you mentioned.
Right. And it's complicated to calculate because while one group might have a 6-month speed to proficiency, another group, it may take them 8 months before they become as efficient. And the other factor is day one handle time, how inefficient they are. Do they take twice as long or 1.5 times longer than a tenured agent? That varies by line of business, by company, by market. So these are complex calculations that are not necessarily so easy to do ourselves. And more importantly, at the end of the day, it shields us from really understanding what that true cost of attrition is. And what we find is that these true costs of attrition can be 2, 3, I've seen ones that I've modeled that are 4 times higher than just that simple back of the napkin math when we just focus on the training hours that are involved. Part of this is us really coming up with a way to calculate and communicate this to executives. If we want to advance to an organization that is really about people first and stopping attrition, understanding the reasons why people attrit, calculating and communicating the true cost of replacing people is a part of solving the problem. So let's take a look at a dynamic calculator that we've built here, and I'll give a demo after it. The calculator itself has a few tabs. We start by leveraging the actual workload that we would calculate the base required headcount. You can leverage this to put in annual work hours, the annual calls for your operation or for a segment of your operation, the tenured handle time for that, the shrinkage, and the occupancy. On the second tab, we basically put in all of our turnover factors, not just the annual turnover of 50%, but how long the training length is, how much attrition we have in training, what that speed to proficiency is. Does it take them 6 months, 8 months, 12 months, or longer to become as efficient as a tenured agent? And what's that curve look like? Are they twice as long on handle time on day one, 1.5 times, 1.8 times? And then in order to monetize a lot of this, we put down salary and a spot where we can capture these other costs, such as recruiting and onboarding with HR and IT. After we've put those inputs in, we essentially can see the base required headcount that we have on the FTEs based on that workload that we calculated. And then we can see the total FTEs that we need to hire based on our annual attrition. We have some placeholders for budget in here just based on the $50,000, but this is really just so that we can see what our total cost of attrition is relative to our total budget. And most important, understanding that the total cost of attrition is not just your training costs, but it's the onboarding costs and the speed to proficiency as well. The tool itself, which I'll bring up and just play with a little bit here, is located out on wfmlabs.org/calculators. You're free to go in. It's a dynamic calculator where you can play with the levers, model this out yourself, and then join us when we have our session. Give us feedback. We'd love to hear if other things should be incorporated into this or if this makes sense. So let me bring over real quick the actual calculator. So wfmlabs.org/calculators. And as I said, you just start simply by putting in your workload. I've got 1.2 million calls here. If it's 600,000 calls, handle time, 576, shrinkage, you just put in your shrinkage value, your occupancy value, and you can see dynamically changing over here is your base headcount required. Again, you could model this for your whole organization. You could model it for a segment of your organization to understand the base FTEs. And the reason why we're doing that is really understanding just your base headcount ultimately allows us to model out things like speed to proficiency, the turnover rate, and the costs associated. Once you've established your inputs here to understand the base FTE, you click next on to the turnover factors. And again, you might be experiencing 40% attrition. Your training length could vary. 6 weeks, I don't know, Nate, you said you had trainings that went up to 16 weeks.
Yeah, 12 and 16 weeks.
We've got training that goes over here all the way up to 24 weeks in length. The training attrition, Nate, have you seen, I think this varies class to class, but what types of things have you seen in the past?
Usually around 20% is what I've seen historically.
Yeah. And we're probably a little extreme here on 100%, but you can slide this up and down over between 0 and 100. And then speed to proficiency, again, depends on the complexity of your segment, 6 months, 8 months, and your workforce team would know sort of what do the new hires start out at? Do they start out at 1.6 times, as high as 2 times? You can go as high as you like here, but there's always an inefficiency on handle time. And that curve is usually a month by month model where they become more efficient over the 6 or 8 or 12 months of efficiency or proficiency, speed to proficiency. So your salary, you can go and put in a loaded salary here and then your onboarding costs. A lot of organizations don't have a solid number for this, but if you ask your HR department, your recruiting, IT, they should be able to give you a rough idea of really what does it cost to bring on a new employee. I hear a wide range of estimates down here across the industry. I don't know, Nate, again, if you remember from any of your past experiences, this always seemed like a soft number, but I'd hear anywhere from $1,500 up to $4,000 an agent.
I was just going to say 2,500 is the number that I've seen in the recent past.
Yeah. 2,500, and at the end of the day here, you can put in these workload calculations, the turnover, and all these numbers will change dynamically so that you can understand at a 40% attrition rate with this 2,000 workforce, I've got around a $28 million cost. If I had just done that back of the napkin math, I would have come up with 16 million if I had just focused on the actual training length itself. But with our onboarding costs, and again, our speed to proficiency costs, almost $10 million, our cost of attrition is 28 million. I'll go over the ROI section in a second here, but down below, as you scroll down the tools, we give you some interactive dialogue as well. Many leaders don't recognize the full cost implications of attrition. In our simple calculation with this 40% attrition, my training takes 16 weeks. My cost of attrition would be around $12 million. In this particular case, we're 2.3 times as much, or 28 million. You'll see this number dynamically move up and down. A big factor on whether or not it goes way up or way down is the training length. You'll see shorter training, you can actually underestimate far more what that true cost is. In a 6-week training, the cost is actually underestimated significantly more. It's 3.8 times as much. So it's a fun dynamic to play with here. The longer you're training, this number will go down. It's still a meaningful impact, but even on short training, you have even a higher risk of understating what your true attrition costs are. Again, speed to proficiency is a big factor. We put in here a graph so that you can see at the end of the day, your training costs, your onboarding costs, and your speed to proficiency, and what that makes up. And again, some more dialogue below here explaining how your speed to proficiency makes up a significant portion of those costs. We give your AHT learning curve graphically here so that you can see, does that make sense in terms of how your new hires come on? And then finally, we summarize it by showing your total training dollars and how that accounts for your complete budget itself. In here, we've got 17% of the total budget is tied back to onboarding, speed to proficiency, and training. So quite a bit of information that you can consume, and most importantly, communicate back to your leaders by leveraging this calculator. So what do you think, Nate, of the tool itself?
Yeah, Ted, I think this is fantastic. This will be very helpful in trying to explain the true cost. I mean, one of the key things that I saw that I've never really put on paper is the speed to proficiency piece, because that is a huge cost that you really don't even think about when you're calculating all this. But a tool like this will be very handy in day-to-day life, trying to explain the true cost of attrition.
Yeah. And I think the more the leaders can see how important attrition is, it helps us on our path where we're trying to expose just why are people leaving and how do we reposition workforce management to really be in the agent's corner and start going after things like forecasting attrition, understanding the root cause, and trying to drive this number down. The final tab is if you've got an idea around how to reduce attrition, we built just a quick ROI calculator. So, you know, this is a bad idea. I don't think Friday free lunches will help maintain people. I was reading an interesting study that little gimmicks like that aren't as helpful as people think. But if you decided that Friday free lunches at a cost of $400 annual per agent was going to drive attrition down by 6 points, you can model out here what your savings costs, what your savings are versus your investment itself. So 6% attrition reduction would mean a $2.6 million savings cost, bringing that's $19 million down by $2 million. Investment at $970,000 if you were to apply it to 100% of the agents at $400 annual, and then it gives you your ROI and your payback period. So that's just a cool little tool that allows you to do a quick ROI calculator based on your idea to reduce attrition.
Fantastic.
All right, so we hope you enjoyed that quick little overview of our dynamic calculator. And as I mentioned, we're going to be hosting an interactive session on Thursday, April 13th at 7 p.m. Eastern. For those of you in the WFM Labs community, the invite is already out there. We'll also post it on LinkedIn next week where you can sign up to attend. We're interested in demoing this again, speaking to the high costs of attrition, but most importantly, what have we missed? And if you're able to play with the calculator, we'd be very interested in the feedback. Is this useful? Are there other enhancements to the calculator that we could make that would help people communicate these high costs of attrition? So Nate, I just want to thank you for your input and your time today, and I look forward. Yep, thank you, Nate. I appreciate it. Look forward to seeing everybody online, hearing your comments, and joining us on Thursday, April 13th. Thanks.
Thank you.